first, in the beginning, I would like to thank organizers and especially Peter. We have met in Thessaloniki last year, and we are very happy about this event. I mean, about Thessaloniki and also about the possibility to be here. So our presentation deals with the musical scales in traditional singing, and probably it is characteristic for different nations, mostly in Eastern Europe, in the beginning of 19th century, or in the beginning of 20th century, or in the end of 19th, and it's so-called period of national renaissance, to connect ancient history of Europe, and if we speak about music, to find something similar with the ancient Greeks. So in the beginning of 20th century, it was widely accepted that there are many similarities between the musical scales in the Lithuanian traditional songs and the so-called ancient Greek modes. Actually, this attitude is still alive now. But when we hear those songs, when we listen those even very old recordings, we notice some things that that music sounds quite peculiar from the viewpoint of scales. It is not, so say, very temperate. And also we should notice that those ethnomusicologists also speak about about moving from one ancient Greek mode to another and coming back, so to say, about chromaticisms, about modal changes. So then this fact gives an idea that maybe it's not everything correct with the notion of ancient Greek modes. Additionally, we find some alternative observations in the studies of different ethnomusicologists coming from different musical cultures of Europe, most of West Europe. For instance, concerning songs collected in Lincolnshire, Granger wrote that the singers from whom I have recorded do not seem to me to have sung three different and distinct modes, but have rendered their modal songs in one single, and this is very important, loosely knit modal folk song scale. Loosely knit, so say those the scale degrees are quite flexible, flexibly intoned. Another typical example given by Norwegian researcher Rytis Ambrazevičius. It's actually not about folk songs, but about scales in musical instruments. Their musical instrument called Langley. So the fact that that can be extracted from his observation that there is a frame, that's quite stable frame of tonal structure, and this frame is filled in with quite flexible scale degrees. And the most important thing also is that the intervals are not contrasting. They are not whole tones and semitones, but something in between and very flexible. So we have made measurements of our music, our folk songs, and we have found that on average they are more similar to theoretical equidistant scale. This is denoted here by those points, E, E, E. This, let's say, the scale with the intervals of 175 cents in between the neighboring scale degrees. So actually the fact that the traces of equidistant scale do exist in Lithuanian traditional songs, it is clear. But now our aims of particularly this study is to identify some possible groups of different musical scales. Maybe there are differences, maybe are the different manifestations of that equidistant scale, and maybe there are differences among ethnomusical regions or dialects of singing. So we took 3 samples of songs from different regions of Lithuania, and namely 23 songs from Slovakia, from this part, sample S, then 10 songs from Žemaitija, from this part, from the western Lithuania, and also 21 songs from this part, Aukštaitija. Those samples also represent different styles of singing, because those 2 samples, S and Slovakia and Žemaitija, those two samples are combined of monophonic songs, solo singing. Let's hear, for instance, one example. Maybe I can hear that this woman, so she sings not correct pitches. And another sample is also this is an example of polyphony singing based on mostly seconds in between voices. So say, actually, it is based on the effect of roughness and psychoacoustical phenomena of roughness, and presentation in the session before was therefore very interesting for us. So. So those recordings are of quite bad technical quality, because they all of them they were taken from 1930s. We have made acoustical measurements. So say we have measured structural pitches. We have used RAD, probably you know this software as well. And also for the case of sutartinas, for this polyphonic singing, we used simply spectra of sounds, of dyads, and we have got those pitches from partials of spectra. So see, we have measured those intervals, and so we defined average scales of every song. Average scale, I mean intervals, pitches, and intervals in between the scale degrees. And then we have developed this simple method, so-called method of diatonic contrast. Let's imagine that we define as diatonic contrast is equal to 0 when when all intervals are the same, let's say, and when, let's say, we could take the whole tones and the semitones, where semitones are, when the whole tone comprises exactly 2 semitones. We state that the diatonic contrast is equal to 1, and then we developed some formula for calculation of how well the intervals between succeeding scale degrees fall into 2 classes, into 2 contrasted classes of large and narrow intervals. So if diatonic contrast, let's say, is 0.5, we say that it is in the middle between a equidistant scale and let's say major or minor in temperate before tell that way. Now Robertas will speak something about cluster analysis.
Hierarchical cluster analysis can be applied for identification of groups of musical scales. Cluster analysis identifies groups of individuals or objects that are similar to each other but different from individuals in other groups. Agglomerative hierarchical clustering with squared Euclidean distance and average linkages applied in our research. Intervallic structures of scales are considered as data for the evaluation of similarity. The intervallic structure can be represented in several ways. The basic representation is a set of relative pitches with regard to the first scale degree, which is normalized to 0. Other two representations are as follows: a set of intervals between adjacent scale degrees, and a set of intervals of all possible pairs of scale degrees. Some tests showed that in most cases, the third representation gives the results which approximate the subjective visual evaluations of similarity the best. Therefore, cluster analysis was performed only with this kind of scale representation. It should be also taken into account that scales with similar relative intervallic structures tend to be considered as similar. For instance, two versions of equidistant scales with different constituent intervals nevertheless are manifestations of the same principle of equitonics. The same should be stated about diatonic scales, for instance, evenly compressed or stretched measure scale. Therefore, before the cluster analysis, the ranges of scales were normalized so that the intervals between the lowest and the highest scale degrees were set to 1. This allowed the effect of compressing or stretching of otherwise similar scales from cluster analysis to be eliminated. The disadvantage of cluster analysis is the requirement to classify objects with an equal amount of features. Musical scales vary in the number of scale degrees. Therefore, they have to be modified to meet the requirement. For this reason, only the scales comprising the same scale degrees were selected from each sample. If some examples possessed additional degrees above or below, the degrees were excluded from the analysis. Also, a composite set of scales from all samples was prepared.
So, okay. About results, we have got results for diatonic contrast of those 3 samples, as you see here. And if the point in the middle between a theoretical equidistant scale and the diatonic is 0.05, so we can clearly see that the tendency of equidistant scale in those all of those three cases. So on the average, the scales are more equidistant than diatonic. So say they fall into one category, into one class. If we speak about the intervals between neighboring scale degrees, but not so much into 2 classes. So cluster analysis, please.
The results of hierarchical cluster analysis are often presented in the form of a dendrogram. There is no strict criterion for finding the best cluster solution, and the optimal number of clusters depends on the goal of the investigation. This dendrogram shows the result for scales from Suvalkija sample. The four-cluster solution seems to be quite reasonable, as the number of groups of scales is neither too large nor too small, and the differences among clusters are sufficient. This graph shows the same scales from Slovakia sample represented as relative pitches in regard to the first scale degree and grouped according to the results of cluster analysis. The gray points indicate the scale degrees excluded from the analysis. The first and the largest group contains versions of roughly equidistant scales. The scales from the second group resemble the natural or harmonic major scales. The third group of scales is characteristic of the framework of a perfect fourth with equidistantly distributed intermediate degrees and additional fifth and lowered sixth degrees. And the fourth group contains two unclassifiable scales with very unusual intervallic structure. Žemaitija sample is distinguished by scales with unusually wide intervals. Quite many of them are wider than tempered whole tone. Scales in the first group have a narrow interval between the third and fourth degrees, and those resemble stretched versions of major scale. It is somewhat difficult to describe and classify the other scales. Nevertheless, it can be concluded that the scales of songs 2 and 5 are two versions of rough equitonics, and the scale of song 7 resembles Lydian scale characterized by the narrow interval between the fourth and the fifth degrees. This graph shows scales of polyphonic songs sutartinės from Aukštaitija sample. The scales are normalized so that the averages of the scale nuclei are set to 0. Most of the sutartinės scales are quite symmetric and equidistant. Single scales in the third and the fourth groups have a symmetric diatonic structure with quasi-whole tones and semitones. In general, the results show that each sample splits into homogeneous groups, and most of the groups have the unique intervallic structure. The cluster analysis was also performed on the composite sample of the three regions to ascertain if there is any relation between the scale structure and particular region or style. If the scales of particular region or style roughly fell into separate clusters, the relation would be confirmed. Four-cluster solution was applied, as cluster 4 contains a single and very dissimilar scale, and other three clusters were expected to represent the three different regions or styles. Summarized results are shown in the table. At first glance, they do not provide solid evidence on the scale specific to a particular region or style. However, certain shortcomings can be envisaged in such application of the method. For instance, the sample is too small to make statistically significant conclusions of the kind discussed. Thus, probably, enlargement of the samples and revision of the combinations would help to reveal the factor of region or style in the composite sample.
If we can have some on the time for some conclusion. So, based on the results of evaluations of diatonic contrasts, it can be stated that 65% of the analyzed song examples are more similar to the equidistant scale, whereas 35% would resemble more diatonic than equitonic. The traces of the equidistant scale are not equally strong for the different dialects under investigation, and polyphonic sutartinės from Aukštaitija show the strongest impact, while the element of diatonics is relatively more pronounced in the monophonic songs from Slovakia. In general, the cluster analysis reveals the same regularities. Additionally, it can be stated that the examples from Žemaitija present first the most chaotic or diverse scales, and second, the intervals are significantly stretched compared to the conventional cases. On the contrary, the scales of many sutartinės from Aukštaitija are even strongly similar. Most probably it results from the fact that the sutartinės are polyphonic songs, and precision of the intervals between simultaneous voices should be strongly observed to reach the maximum clash or roughness in psychoacoustical terms. Perhaps this attention to the relative precision of intonation explains the approximate equability of the interval sizes as well. And last sentence, the different distinctness of the traces of equidistant scale correlates well with the historical position of the dialects, because sutartinės from Aukštaitija, those polyphonic songs, are considered as belonging to the most archaic musical relics, and the songs of Suvalkija present relatively modern musical thinking. Thank you for the attention.
Okay, thank you for the interesting presentation. There's a question there.
The problem of scale is very important for East European folk music research. But my question will be following. Your example is not large. Altogether some 50 melodies from 3 regions. And the smallest representation was 10 songs from Žemaitija, yes? And I wanted to ask, among these, for example, 10 songs from Žemaitija, were all of them performed by different singers, or some singers were singing more than one song? The reason why I'm asking this question is that there might be also some personal, some individual inclinations in intonation. So I wonder to what degree you can generalize using this limited example, and to which you must be rather careful with interpretation, although the problem is very important and the method I think is very good.
Thank you for the question, for the good question. Actually, we do not have much material for sound material from that time, from 1930s, but nevertheless we tried and we succeed to not to take 2 songs from the same singer. So all those songs belong to different singers. So nevertheless we can see that that stretching of scale is typical for all of them, let's say. So if I answered your question.
Well, in general, yes, but do you intend to repeat this research on a large example also? To have, I don't know, something like 300 songs?
Yes. Actually, this example show from the previous study. It was dealing with a quite large sample. So see, the very fact of traces of equidistant thinking, it is clear. But if we speak about nuances, about differences among regions and so on, yes, we will proceed with the larger samples.
Okay, we have time for one last question. I was actually interested, in the light of the transcription session that we have planned tomorrow. Have there been any attempts to transcribe these songs, which you now classified as being more equitonic than diatonic, in a Western system?
You speak about conventional transcription using five-wave stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course. This is a topic for the next presentation, we can say, because it's very very strange things are going. The problem, if to say briefly, the problem is that people do believe notations, transcriptions. somehow they do not believe sound, but they believe notation. So they write down, and then they come to conclusions about, let's say, okay, those ancient Greek scales, or chromaticism, or that, or even if we speak not necessarily about pitch and scales, but about rhythmics, also the same. So I would say like this, that transcriptions, those transcriptions on conventional stuff, they should be considered as simply as drafts, as ideas about how approximately does it sound. And if we want to say something more concrete, more certain, more definite about the musical scales, let's say, we should put those transcriptions away, and then we should go to the sound and maybe to listen and to make some acoustical measurements, or maybe to use some additional methods, psychological methods, and so. But we should not believe the notations on conventional stuff.
Okay, thank you. That's